A lot of churches, in fact, many of them following our encouragement, are doing drive-in services, especially this weekend for Resurrection Sunday. In fact, as I have said, I'm helping facilitate one here in my home community, and we're expecting several hundred people come and be a part of that. They'll be in their car, keeping their distance. The windows will be up. They'll be listening on FM radio station. Nothing wrong with that. No different than driving down the street. Why would officials target individuals sitting in their car at a church, ticketing them $500? Overzealous, and this is where you begin to lose the support of the people. I mean, this is the dangerous point. When you start to do stuff like that, voluntary compliance begins to fall away. Because people then begin to see that this is about something more than public safety and health, and that you have elected officials that have an agenda. And I'm telling you, as I said before, we will defend the first freedom. We'll defend the community, and I'm completely supportive of the president's or the CDC's guidelines, strictly adhering to them. Even last week, my daughter got married. We had basically 10 people for the wedding. We'll abide by those. But I will not allow these overzealous, I'm being cautious what I say, elected officials to trample upon our first freedom. Joining me now to talk more about this, Travis Weber, Vice President of Policy here at the Family Research Council. Travis, these things are starting to pop up in parts of the country, as I said, going into the second month of these meeting restrictions. Washington State is one of those states where they have gone, I think, across the line. They've crossed the line in terms of religious liberty. So this is, it's becoming a little more frequent, is it not?
It is, Tony. I think we're looking at more of a case of whack-a-mole right now in these situations in which states, as you're mentioning, are approaching this with a lack of caution. Very dangerous because, what you were talking about earlier, it gets at the issue of trust between citizens and the government. We always need to be vigilant, but when citizens see the government acting properly to protect constitutional rights and protect religious freedom, we think of the Texas Attorney General's guidance on religious freedom indicates, hey, we're aware of religious freedom even while we're trying to guard against public safety. That sends a signal that can let people work with the government. But when you start to see, as you're mentioning, government overreach, it breaks that down, breaks down that trust, erodes it. Washington State is an example of this. They're classifying essential businesses to include marijuana dispensaries, yet their order is so narrowly drawn, or so broad, and so careless when it comes to religion that perhaps it might even prevent two priests in private celebrating the Mass and then broadcasting it, live streaming it. We don't know this, but we're looking at the order, and it could be that bad. And there's other situations we've been talking about, Kansas and elsewhere, where these people are grappling through these things, and then you have, but without good guidance, you have officers going out issuing citations, putting people, accusing people, charging them with violating the law, starts to really erode that trust. So we're seeing, more cases of this pop up, and we're really trying to get a handle on it, starting to categorize the way that states are looking at these things. Hope to have more information for the public soon in terms of resource to be able to understand what's happening, and then determine, hey, this violates religious freedom or it doesn't. We want to have a clear line and a model position for governments to be able to take on this.
It's a great lesson in how a republic works, in that, we voluntarily submit ourselves to the Constitution. The Constitution is the governing document. That's the agreement by which we agree to be governed. And we have enumerated rights in there that are anticipated, fully expected, that the government will protect those rights. It's not rights that the government gives us. It's rights that we recognize that come from God that will be protected by the government. And so when they trample upon that, that's where the agreement begins to break down, And it can really get into a tailspin very quickly. And so it's important that government officials exercise restraint. It's important that citizens exercise restraint, and that we seek to do, our part in a republic as ours, a constitutional republic, and we each, agree to live by the terms of that agreement. And we understand, we've talked about here on this program, that there are limitations. Sometimes they have to be put in place for emergencies, but they have to be reasonable, they have to be limited, and they have to be applied universally. And that's when that doesn't happen, that's where you begin to have this breach, as you said, breach of trust that can really, really cause the whole thing just to come apart. I want to mention this, Travis, before we run out of time. We talked about this yesterday in San Bernardino, California, the county there, late Tuesday night putting out an order that said you couldn't meet with drive-in cars, drive-in services where cars couldn't come into the parking lot. You couldn't drive through and get, Easter eggs or, prayer. And that now has been rescinded. I was just mentioned it briefly earlier with Pastor Jack Hibbs, but I had talked to him about it yesterday morning, and he actually called the county executive there and found out that they had prematurely released that statement, and after a conversation, they walked that back. They did acknowledge that they had gotten a lot of pushback. So, folks, I would certainly encourage you, if you live in one of these jurisdictions like Greenville, Mississippi, where I know our signal covers this area, I would certainly encourage you to call the mayor there in Greenville, Mississippi. Maybe I'll get the number before we get off the air here. But Travis, what are some of those other jurisdictions where people can reach out and have conversations with their elected officials?
Yeah, Tony, I think this is a great lesson. Ill-conceived press release was issued. Pastor Jack inquired, and the issue, appears resolved. So we need to remain vigilant. I would say everywhere across the country, when there's a concern about unnecessary, unconstitutional impact on worship and religious exercise, folks should inquire with the relevant authorities there and clarify what the stance is. And then if there's a problem, alert us. We'll help alert legal counsel to get involved and make sure that these issues are corrected. I mentioned Washington State. We're seeing a lot of places that have not designated religious services or clergy as essential yet, which is a good sign if they do. So if they haven't done that, Washington State hasn't done that, and others, it puts us all in a position of grateful alarm. We're still kind of classifying due to a lot of these differences here, but I would say across the board, especially where have not been designated as essential, religious services essential, folks need to be aware of what's happening, and even where they have. In Florida, we had issues popping up there and elsewhere, even though the government there eventually took steps to clarify along the lines that I'm stating. So, Tony, I would say everywhere we all need to participate in this right now, because the story is my colleagues Kana Gonzalez and David Clausen have a blog just up now about how many churches, overwhelmingly number of churches that participating and cooperating with the government's efforts here to deal with this crisis, the CDC guidelines, other reasonable government measures. You mentioned those. There are a infinitesimally small number of churches that are not cooperating. And this is important to understand. Right now, we're in a good spot, but we need to keep the ball moving ahead in terms of government authorities respecting religious freedom to remain in the spot that we're in now. Absolutely.
And by the way, folks, I do have the number for Mayor Simmons in Greenville, Mississippi. His number is 662-378-1501. That's 662-378-1501. Mayor Simmons is the one that ordered churchgoers that were in their cars last night to get $500 tickets for meeting. 662-378-1501 for those of you who live in the state of Mississippi. Travis, thanks so much for joining us. Look forward to those resources coming out early next week.
Thanks, Tony.
And folks, thank you for joining us, and I certainly do encourage you to be in prayer for our nation's situation, pray for our leaders, pray for all of them, that they would make wise decisions, and that we would make wise decisions as well.